So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how I will successfully pass and implement um, my Sovereign and Clean Native Waters program. So this program effectively just eliminates the treated as a state provision within the Clean Waters Act and recognizes the jurisdiction that tribal governments have over their own waters and to create their own water quality standards. This program will give them the funding to do so and educational support as well. So first, to talk about why this matters really quick, I talked about this a lot in my, not policy paper, my persuasive paper, position paper. I talked about this in my position paper a lot, but in summary, why tribal governments should have jurisdiction over their own waterways is because it increases water quality throughout the United States. It brings high-paying and meaningful jobs to areas with extreme unemployment. It expands the capacity of tribal governments, especially because it oftentimes results in the creation of natural resources management agencies within tribal governments, and it creates more political agency for Native governments as it increases the interaction of Native governments with state governments and federal governments. So it matters a lot and should happen. So how I'm going to make it happen is by getting Donald Trump to pass an executive order to implement it. Why I decided to go this route, which seems kind of extreme, is because first I thought about how the EPA should honestly just change its policy and how easy that would be, except EPA doesn't have the funding to allocate to this policy, and I think there needs to be a lot of funding for the policy to be effective, or the program to be effective. So I eliminated that. Then two, I went and I considered Congress and passing legislation through Congress. However, if you look at the track record of the current Congress, they have not passed a single piece of legislation that explicitly supports only Native American issues. There might be legislation that supported Native American issues in some way or another, but it was actually just like as a side effect of legislation that was supporting rural interests or like agriculture interests. So looking at Congress and looking at what Native American lobbyists are saying online, I realized that that was just honestly not a very realistic solution towards passing this program and getting this program implemented. So I decided that I would convince Donald Trump that he needed to pass an executive order to implement this program. And he's not only going to pass an executive order implementing this program, he's going to pass an executive order that decries that because of the state of public health and poverty on Native American reservations, there's a national emergency on Native American reservations today, and that he must allocate emergency funding towards not only this program to ensure clean water on Native American reservations, but also to ensure funding for education reform, domestic violence, abuse, address alcoholism, and address access to safe food as well, which are the main tenets that Native American lobbyists are fighting for today. So why Donald Trump is going to do this? Because Donald Trump is notoriously against Native Americans. He is going to do this because Donald Trump is going to be convinced by the the National Congress of American Indians that they will advocate hard for him to win the Native American vote if he passes this executive order and begins showing like explicit support for Native American legislation and Native American issues overall. And Donald Trump is going to buy this because he actually needs the Native American vote to win. He realizes that this is an easy demographic to target because all he has to do is pass a few pieces of pass this executive order and express commitment to being the voice of the, or not really the voice, like the president of the Native American interests, and then he can secure the Native American vote. And this is because the Native American vote, while small within the contiguous United States, relatively, is actually quite large within swing states. For example, in Michigan, he won by 11,000 votes, but there's actually 100,000 Native American votes in Michigan. So, and this remains true in Wisconsin as well, that there's more Native American votes than the votes that he won by, and there's more Native American votes in Minnesota and Nevada than the number of votes that he lost by. So if he hopes to win these states that either he won by a very small margin previously or win states that he lost by a small margin previously, then he needs to target a new population, a new demographic, and that demographic could be easily the Native American demographic. So he decides that this is actually a really good political move for him. He buys into it, he does it. A little caveat side thing here is that I actually don't like hope Donald Trump wins the 2020 election, but being tasked with how to pass this policy, I recognize this as a creative solution to doing so and decided to explore this possibility. So then going back to what the policy looks like and what funding for it looks like, through the executive order, he would allocate emergency funding towards these programs, and this would be, okay, he would allocate this emergency funding towards these programs, and because Donald Trump's previous executive order allocating emergency funding towards the wall was upheld by the Supreme Court, he would actually gain little backlash against this. I mean, people would be mad, but he would not get that backlash that would make this ineffective. And actually, people wouldn't be that mad because the Republicans would support him because they support Donald Trump no matter what nowadays, and the Democrats would support this because this actually is in line with the Democratic ideology. They would just be really confused on why he's doing it. So hopefully later on, what they would dislike is that the funding is coming from emergency funding, so legislation would be introduced to allocate funding to the BIA and the EPA for more sustainable sources of funding for this program, which both the Republicans, because they support Trump, and the Democrats, because they are supposed to be the party of the Native Americans, will pass. So that'll be awesome. Funding will be secured. Other opposition that this might face is actually the state governments, because state governments, whenever tribal governments gain jurisdiction over their own waterways, have historically challenged this. However, because it's a executive order, and I'll get into this in implementation, but I'll create like timelines on how fast this has to be implemented, then they'll have little agency over this actually occurring or not occurring. And also upstate polluters or upriver polluters will also dislike this. However, their lobbying abilities will be quite low in this case. And I don't think Donald Trump's going to be particularly concerned about whether he's going to gain those votes or not, because he will. So then looking at the implementation of the program, first defining eligibility for the program. I talked about this a lot in my paper, but I'm expanding the eligibility for this program past who is eligible for the treat as a state provision in the Clean Waters Act, because I don't want, because I'm making it so that even if you have partial jurisdiction over waterways, you still have jurisdiction if you're a Native American governing body over that waterway to create the water quality standards for it, to avoid any legal disputes that this might create. So then past that, I'm also going to create an opt-out system where Native American governments can choose to opt out of it. I get into this again more in my paper, the nuances why that might happen, why governments might want to opt out, but this might also create a side effect where like states that really don't want Native American populations to have jurisdiction over their own waterways to incentivize them to opt out by giving them other like resources or needs or rights that they want more than jurisdiction over their own waterways. And I think this is fine, like if ideally they would have both those needs met, but if they choose to use their political power that this program created to trade off their jurisdiction over their own waterways in lieu of some other right that they need, that's again government or like tribal self-determinism, and I'm fine with that. So then looking for funding and how this is actually going to be implemented, I'm going to create a big, like obviously funding allocated towards infrastructure itself, but what I'm really concentrating on in my paper is creating a educational programs to ensure that those who are being employed by the new program are the Native Americans on those reservations. And so I concentrate a lot on how to do this capacity building and do it in an effective way, and do it within the time constraints that I'm creating, which is about 5 years. And then ultimately how that transition is going to be smooth between the state government or federal government that currently resides over that waterway to the tribal government. So that is my paper. Oh, ultimately also, that's my paper, that's my policy. But I do recognize that the weaknesses of my policy are, one, the executive order is kind of an extreme move. I'm doing that more out of like academic creativity than anything else, and just wanted to explore what that would look like. I also recognize that implementation of this is like really nuanced and really difficult, and that I might not have thought of everything that needs to be done to actually get this done, especially when the programs are notorious for failing on Native American reservations. But I'm hoping by allocating a lot of funding to be able to do this effectively and creating in a big concentration on education building rather than just like infrastructure building, this will be a successful program. So I hope you enjoy my paper. Yeah, have a great break.